There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, my new year is starting off on the right foot. Bill from Nairobi is back. Hello, Bill.
Hi, Sean.
Nice. So, Bill has just very recently finished reading an Australian novel that I've had my eye on since it first came out in early 2021, The Performance by Claire Thomas. You loved it. Tell us why.
What's not to like about it? It's the multiple perspective. It's the one story that it's these three women enjoying experiencing a play about a Samuel Beckett play, and we follow one older woman, 70, and one middle-aged 40, and then the other one younger 20s, and they all one works at the 20-year-old works at the theater, and then the 40-year-old is sort of like this wealthy woman who funds the theater, and the older one is a almost retired lecturer, English professor. So they all have a connection with Samuel Beckett, the play, and the play is about a woman sort of sinking in the ground, like she just gets the earth sort of swallowed her. And as they watch the play, they perform their lives. How they perform their lives, it's very meta in that way. As we watch them perform their lives, we are also, as I was reading the book, I was performing my life. There's a sense of like she breaks that down very well, and we get to hop in each of their lives, how they interact with their husbands, their children, death, the environment, in different stages of their lives. So we see like time through, because they're different ages, and it's so beautifully written, accessible. I really, really like their voices.
Now, this is very interesting. So, a couple questions. First off, when you say we follow them, do we follow them leading up to them arriving at the theater for the play, or does the action it up to that?
Yeah, so we start with them with the one perspective sitting in the play, the older woman. She arrives into the theater, passes the way you're late at a movie. Let's say you're going to the movies and then you say, excuse me, like start scooching like that sort of, and then she sits scratching and like uncomfortable to get comfortable. And we're also like, it's very cinematic in the way they portray it. And she's aware of the play, and she taught a class on it, and she critiques it and how the lighting is. She describes it so vividly. And at the same time, she sort of does these things that are familiar to us, like when you try to hold a cough and
yes,
and it
I
keeps
know all
coming.
about that.
Yeah, so there's a play on that. There's a funny, there's humor to it in the way we presented the characters, how they want to reach for their phones and get into the studio, and how the etiquette around it. But it gets deeper with it because they start spacing out. The play is just there to ground them, but they're not really grounded. If that makes sense.
So it's structured around various scenes from these women's lives.
Yeah, interlinked, yeah. And I don't want to spoil it, but during the middle part, she does something very interesting with the structure. And that's what got me. It spiked the book. It made the book even better, because before it was just jumping from one perspective to the next, and what was happening currently in their lives. But right in the middle of the book, it sort of turns into something else.
We'll let the reader find it. Yeah, you're certainly getting me intrigued. She's an Australian writer. Is it an Australian novel? Like, is it set in Australia? Does it feel like
set in Australia? Yeah. As the play is going on, there's a raging fire happening outside. So there's this element of environmental climate catastrophe interweaved into the narrative, especially with the 20-year-old. She feels like she needs to pay attention to it. Like watching the play, is sort of a waste of time when the world is burning outside, but she can't leave the Fiantin intermission. So she's constantly anxious about it. It's so far removed because it's close. They're sort of trapped in this theater, and the world outside is burning. That in itself is a very cool contrast, I think.
It is. Yeah.
That also added to the conversation, and you don't know until later, like when you meet the 20-year-old character, that the world, that
It's
Australia is
burning.
actually there's a wildfire coming. Yeah, and there's also a queer element to it, which I know you will definitely enjoy.
Great,
There's a
great. So they're watching the Beckett play, or this is the kind of the central event in the theater. Are we getting the play itself somehow in the book? Like, do we find out
Yes.
what's going on in the play? That's part of the story.
Yes, and we get it in small pieces of the actress sort of like performing, and then the characters critiquing the performance, like, oh, it's so she's just being over dramatic, and like there's a sort of funny texture to it as you get they sort of talk about their memories. They're sort of reflecting on what's happening internally with them, going through their memories, and then they sort of get brought back by the play in those small moments when we also get to see the play and they describe what's happening to us.
And then we get scenes from their lives, and that very much encouraged or sparked you to start reflecting on your own life as you were reading it. So that definitely sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it bends your mind in a very cool way. As you read the book, you'll find yourself also like thinking about, like, stopping reading and thinking about your life, because they talk about really various themes: death, climate change, like the effects of it, grieving process, and the relationship, and the anxiety that comes with whatever. I read it physically, and it didn't really take me. Immediately I started, I loved the voice of the older woman, and I'm glad she sort of started from that angle, because the older woman has this, her life is sort of put together, but from the get-go you feel like, oh, she's already established, she knows what she wants. Then you slowly realize that she's disconnected from her family, and the play in itself is an escape from her husband. She's sitting there and she's like, I am enjoying this. This is my space. This is my time.
I'm my space.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you read along with the characters, you sort of get the worries from like the younger generation, like the 40-year-old and the 20-year-old. You see that they are more anxious, they're more unsettled in their skin than the older one. It's a very cool contrast.
I was already interested in it, but now I think I have to get to it soon. Thanks for telling us all about it.
You really need to. You really need to. I think it's a smart with a lot of meat.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you so much.
I am so happy to have Ashwin from Kerala State in India back again on Bite Size Chats. Welcome back, Ashwin.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
You are here to talk about a book that I'd never heard of, actually, until I saw your review on Goodreads. And that is a novel translated from the Swedish, a Swedish novel. And the English title is Collected Works. And the subtitle is pretty important here. Collected Works, a novel by Lydia Sandgren, translated from the Swedish by Agnes. And this just sounds fascinating. So what is the opening premise of the novel, Ashwin?
So it's about a woman who has disappeared, but it's not your typical disappeared person story. It's like, instead of focusing on the person who has disappeared, Lydia Sandgren chooses to focus on the aftermath, that is on the family. And more so, not even in like a high drama kind of thing. Instead, it's the subtle changes in their day-to-day routines and how life goes on for them. And the author does something really interesting here, whereas, these people kind of forget about the woman who has disappeared gradually by making the reader themselves forget about this disappeared woman in the first place by adding in more details from everyone else's life, and what are they going through, and the premise also shifts quite a bit, and it plays around with form in a very interesting manner. And the significance of the title is actually what caught my eye the most. It, without spoiling anything, it's like somewhere towards the end you realize what the novel actually was about. It's a very subtle rug pull, and it's done in such a deft manner, but it kind of clicks. That's when you're like, okay, this is why the novel is named Collected Works. Because until then I was like, it's a great novel, but why is it named as Collected Works? Because it is not about some author whose entire legacy we are going through, or collected works technically implies that we have the entire bibliography of an author as a compendium and stuff like that. But towards the end it becomes clear.
You have done a wonderful job of teasing me and everyone watching, because you didn't explain what the title is, but I'm all the more curious to read it and find out. So this is a debut novel.
Yes, it's a debut novel, and even I was also pleasantly surprised, honestly, that a debut. I have a thing for debuts actually, because when debuts are well done, you feel a bit like feel a bit of hope, like especially for aspiring writers, like, okay, maybe your manuscript will go somewhere.
So it also is intriguing that the people left behind, and I'm going to ask you to tell us about some of those main characters who have been left behind, but the fact that they kind of get on with your life. It sounds like there's a subtext here of not absence makes the heart grow fonder, but out of sight, out of mind. So who are these people that are left behind? Who are the main characters in the novel?
There's the husband who's a novelist. There's a daughter who's initially trying to find out a lot about her mother, but then gradually she goes on to find more about her lineage. Then there's a friend. Now I can only go so far, if I'm honest, because it's a very subtle novel, but there is a lot. Venturing any further might get a bit, especially for spoiler conscious people.
I'm enjoying being teased by you about this, so that we'll leave that at that. Looked Lydia Sandgren up just a moment ago, and she is a professor. She's a scholar. Is this quite an intellectual novel?
It is, but at the same time, it's also very accessible. It's intellectual in an exciting way, to be honest. Yes, there are authors mentioned, there are books mentioned, there are psychological papers mentioned as well, but it's done in a way where it doesn't feel like gatekeeping in its immersion or anything. It doesn't feel like it's meant for only a circle jerk crowd of sorts. It's like, sure, people who look for more cerebral reads will get their fix, but at the same time, I would say even people who are not accustomed to this kind of literature, this can be a good initiation point.
I'm just getting more and more excited here. So, it's set in Sweden?
Yes.
Is it quite an evocative sense of place as you're reading? Is the setting important?
Yeah, the setting is important, but it is, so since the novel mentions Knausgaard quite a few times, you must be aware of his My Struggle cycle. So,
Yes.
you get a sense of place and sense of familiarity to the place, whether it's Norway or whether he afterwards moved to Sweden when he married Linda. So it fleshes out the place and time in which it's set, but in a very Knausgaardian manner. Now I'm doing this thing because the proof I received kind of does the same thing as well. Like, the first thing it says is, for readers of Fleshman in Trouble by Taffy Brodesser Ekner and the novels of Jonathan Franzen and The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. Now I haven't read Taffy Brodesser yet, but I honestly didn't see any similarity to either Jonathan Franzen or Elena Ferrante.
Oh, very interesting. But you did to Knausgaard.
Yes, I did to Knausgaard. And in fact, Knausgaard is name dropped in the novel as well. So
that is a good descriptor. So people that don't like him maybe won't like this, and vice versa.
maybe. Although people who don't like Knausgaard, I have a hunch can still give this a chance because there is mundanity, and I love mundanity personally in literature. Knausgaard, Jon Fosse, and all these authors, they are my favorites. But there is still enough of event that's peppered throughout the novel that, it's like people who aren't really patient for mundanity can still get on with it. It's like somewhere between mundane and eventful.
I have read the first 2 volumes of My Struggle, and I love them. I haven't been in a rush to continue, but I do plan to continue. But I tend to enjoy women writers more than male writers. So I'm wondering, is there the aspect of that this is a woman's novel, a novel that's more about women, or from the perspective of a female writer that might make it more appealing to a reader like me?
See, if you enjoy female writers more, obviously it will appeal to you a lot more. And even I personally enjoy female writers a lot more. And I am of the opinion that women not only write women better, but to my eyes, women write even men better. Because
absolutely, women are better writers than men. I think we can all agree on that.
yeah, because they are far more nuanced when it comes to gender. Male writers have this tendency of assuming more than understanding, if I'm being honest.
So thank you for this chat, Ashwin. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
It's always a special treat to welcome a new guest to Bite Size Book Chats, and especially a new queer guest. It's extra exciting for me. So I would like to welcome Hunter from Florida, and he's here to talk about the debut novel, Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. Hunter, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to finally meet you. We have a mutual friend. I think you guys are in real life friends. Bernie Lombardi has been on Bite Size Book Chats a few times. And you have a fabulous amount of stuff going on your Instagram. Tell us what you do over there.
Yeah, I always think of them as just little elevator pitch book reviews in a way. I try to keep them very short and concise, always spoiler free. And I also just like to have different little question posts that kind of ask different questions about the state of literature right now. I do a lot of comparisons. I used to do this. I'm trying to get back into it, but I used to do this thing where I would do this book plus this book equals this book, book equations.
Fun.
So yeah, so it's and I also whenever life is not as chaotic, I do also sometimes do drunk book talk where I
saw, and they were really old. So I'd like to collaborate with you on that someday, because that's my specialty on BookTube.
I think it's very fun. I used to do them all the time, and but the last couple of times I've been so tipsy, I forgot where my phone was, and so I was like, well, I guess I can't do that for a while. It's all kinds of things, but and it's always changing. But I hope it's always interesting bookish conversation that encourages people to read outside of their comfort zone and to engage in just, I don't know, in hopefully different ways than they might get somewhere else.
Yeah, that all sounds fabulous. So, Big Swiss by Jen Beagin, I heard about it and immediately knew I had to buy it, and it was really totally a cover buy. I didn't even really read what it was about, and I have the book here, and now your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to sell me on it. Your post was wonderful. You said it was, I think you were already predicting in February of this year that it might be your top read of the year, so tell us all about it.
Yeah, so Big Swiss is about this woman who is she's, oh gosh, what do you call them? She transcribes, this is about this woman who her job is to transcribe these therapy sessions with this therapist, and how she kind of develops this parasocial relationship with one of the clients of the therapist, who she's given the name Big Swiss, and what happens when they potentially begin to engage in the real world. So
Big Swiss is the name of the therapy client whose therapy sessions this protagonist is transcribing.
Yes, and the protagonist's name is Greta. which I just think is a fun name. And I also really, this is like just a side note, but the protagonist is a woman in her 40s and she's queer. And I don't really think we see enough queer women in their like 40s and 50s and 60s and really exploring things that are, because that's the thing. I think people often write about these characters as if their lives are already kind of like past a certain point. And it's really exciting to read about this person who has like a fully realized world around her and is still messy and figuring things out.
Is this a first person novel?
Yes. Wait, no, I lied. It's third person, but the way that she writes, it feels so intimate. And there's also a lot of the transcriptions are I'm flipping through it right now. I see lots of transcriptions. I'm also going to go out on a limb and say it sounds very much like a character driven novel. It is, yeah. But I think it's character driven in the way that, like, if you've read like Melissa Broder or Otessa Moshfegh or Mona Awad, I think that those types of where it's like there's so much that's happening and there's so much material. I don't know. It's juicy enough to where even though it's mostly about these people and exploring those things, enough's happening to keep you engaged plot wise.
Tell us more about Greta, and then also, I'm assuming the woman whose therapy session she's transcribing is a major character in the novel.
Yeah, so
tell us a little bit more about those two. I'm really curious to hear whatever is not a spoiler to tell us. Yeah.
So we know that it's interesting. The character of Big Swiss, I think, is she's going there because she's having issues in her marriage in the bedroom, and that's what she's there to talk about. But she has this like major trauma that's happened. This is not a spoiler, but she has this major trauma that's happened, and she does not want to talk about that, which I think is really interesting. And it's kind of about how Greta, who is a person who has also been through a lot of trauma, is trying to understand how someone who could go through something so traumatic can kind of just dust it off and move on. So like the real dynamic here is about these two characters like exploring the ways that they approach trauma in very different ways. But it sounds like it would be really dark, but it's not. It's actually a very, very funny novel. But yeah, so and also Greta is just weird. She's weird and she's a little bit toxic, but in all those ways that I really enjoy. I love self-destructive people. I don't know, what can I say?
You're selling me. You're selling me on it. Is it a spoiler to say whether they actually do develop any kind of a connection face to face in real life?
I can tell you that they do meet. I will not tell you more than that, but they do meet. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask you about the tone. You've said it's funny. Is it just funny, or are there other levels?
It's a very layered book, and I really do think that Melissa Broder would be a really good comparison as far as, because she wrote the books Milk Fed and the Pisces. And I think that Big Swiss is a book that is very funny on a micro level. Like there's a lot of like jokes that kind of like keep going. It's very entertaining that way. But I think on the larger scale, it's exploring some very deep and heavy topics at times, but I think it's a satire really. And so I think that it knows how to straddle that line really well. It's got a very dark humor. In some ways, I guess you could also say it is reminiscent of how Fleabag is technically a drama in a lot of ways, the TV show, but it has so many little like punches of humor that it kind of helps you stay afloat.
Now, when I hear the word satire, little warning bells go off for me, because I struggle with most satire, because I feel like as the reader, the text, the novel, the work of fiction is designed in a way that I'm not allowed to care about the characters. I'm only supposed to laugh at them. And I know that's a real caricature of the genre, but so whenever I hear that word satire, especially in this context of a guest on Bite Size Book Chats, then my next question is, did you care about the characters?
Oh, I really did. Also, I should clarify, I'm not the best person to ask this because I love so many characters that people say that they hate. I sometimes don't even realize that a character is the villain until I'm talking to somebody else and they're like, oh, that character was so awful. I'll say Gone Girl. I did not know that one of the characters was considered bad in Gone Girl until I was in the movie theater later and everyone was like, this person is terrible. And I was shocked. So I'm not a good judge of character on that, but I felt deeply for these characters. And I think that Jen Beagin has enough respect for the characters that she's created to not make them the butt of the joke. I also just think it's such a page turner. I truly and I read and listened, and the audiobook is also great. And those can be kind of hit or miss for me. So
Well, I'm left with two very visceral impressions. One is that I think I'm going to be starting this as early as March now because of you. And also, what a fabulous guest you are. Will you come back?
oh my gosh, of course, this has been so fun.
What an absolute delight to have the Irish novelist Cauvery Madhavan back for another bite-sized book chat, joining us from Ireland. Hello, Cauvery.
Hi, Sean. Great to be back again. And I'm going to be talking about a wonderful, wonderful book.
Yes, I am excited to hear about it. Actually, Cauvery and I recorded a long-form chat where she talked about recent reading, and that video will be coming to a BookTube channel near you in the coming weeks. In the meantime, we're going to sneak in one more in the form of a bite-sized book chat. So, Cauvery, what have you got for us today?
So, Sean, this is a book that I came across accidentally, much to my shame, actually, that I came across it accidentally and hadn't heard of it before. It's a book called Solace, and it's by an absolutely wonderful, wonderful writer called Belinda McKeon. And, it's very hard to come to terms with the fact that this is actually a debut novel because it's such an accomplished and absolute fine piece of writing. It's just a wonderful, wonderful book. I picked it up because, the blurb said that it was about contemporary Ireland, and I'm writing myself, a story set in 1980s Ireland, and so trying to sort of absorb as much of it as I can through fiction and nonfiction. So I picked it up, and by God, what a fantastic book.
What's the opening premise?
So the story is, it's about a young man called Mark Casey who leaves his very rural home in Ireland and heads off to Dublin to study. He's leaving a very, very small rural community and absolutely loves his life in Dublin. It's vibrant, it's contemporary, and he sort of settles into becoming a doctorate student, and he's studying a 19th century novelist. And he kind of, he dilly-dallies over his studies, which kind of get more and more prolonged. And in the meanwhile, his father, Tom, just can't understand what this fellow is doing up in Dublin. He doesn't consider him studying for a doctorate thesis as work. For him, work is about the farm and keeping the farm going. That's been in their family for generations. And what he really wants is his son to come home on a regular basis or come home permanently, because there's hay to be baled, there's fields to be plowed, there's animals to be looked after. He just can't understand what the son is doing, whiling away his time on a doctorate that he really can't, come to terms with or get the grips of. In the middle of all this is Mark Casey's mother, who is trying very hard to make peace between the two, between the father and son. What happens is Mark Casey meets a young woman called Joan Lynch in Dublin, falls madly in love, and they are together. And I'm not going to say anything more except to say that a tragedy strikes the family. And it's what happens between the father and son after that, and how they come to, terms with what each one wants out of life. I was really very deeply moved by the story because there's so much of wisdom in this book. I feel it's nearly a book that everybody who leaves home should read, and every parent who has a child leaving should also read, because it's a lot about what your expectations as a young person leaving home, and expectations of parents for, what expectations parents have of their children. It can lead to fairly devastating consequences to the relationship between parents and children. And she's very true and very honest about life in rural Ireland. It particularly struck a chord with me because my eldest girl is marrying a boy from a very, very rural community in Ireland. And I could just see the honesty with which Belinda has written this book.
I had never heard of Belinda McKeon. Can you tell us anything about her?
I'm actually going to just read out from the blurb, Sean, because I myself didn't know anything about her. She is an award-winning playwright and was born in Ireland in 1979. She studied literature at Trinity College in Dublin and, has contributed to the Irish Times. She has an MFA from Columbia and she lives in Brooklyn with her husband, is what it says. But this is a blurb from fairly long ago. The book came out, I think, in 2011.
Cauvery, you've totally sold me on this. Thanks for working your magic, and I'm looking forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks, Sean. And I'd really love for you to read this book. It's a fabulous read.